And we are off. Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode, 513, the All Dolphins podcast for Thursday, June 5th. Joined by Dante Calinelli, who I'm proud and happy to say is now the deputy editor for Miami Dolphins on SI after being a longtime contributor. And his prize for putting up with me for a couple of years now has been to now be deputy editor. How are you, Dante?
I'm doing good. I like the way that title sounds. Sounds good.
Yeah. Absolutely. What I don't like is what I hope you don't like either is what the Miami Dolphins are doing right now, because it's only early June. But if we're trying to set the stage for building up excitement as training camp approaches, I don't know that having contract situations with Jonnu Smith, the Jaylen Ramsey situation, the potential contract issue with Sieler, and then signing players who are bottom of the roster guys, if they even make the roster, is necessarily the way to build up excitement among the fan base. Am I right, Dante?
I think you're absolutely correct. I think, we covered all of that this week, right? And like the optics of this team right now are just terrible, right? Like optically, like the Dolphins' reputation among its own fan base in the national media, it's not good. And you could argue, okay, how much does that matter is debatable for sure, but like it's not good. And I don't know that it's going to get better soon. I think the only thing that fixes it is this team gets into the regular season and gets off to a hot start. Like if they get off to an average start, if they get off to a bad start, it's only going to get worse. The noise is only going to get louder. I think, we can talk about the Sieler thing if you want to, like signing him is a nice step in the right direction, but I don't know that fixes everything. It's good. It'd be great. I hope they do it, but.
Yeah, but here's the thing. And I just looked it up. The last 5 player acquisitions the Dolphins made, and understanding that the Dolphins can't go out and sign every big name. They can't go out and sign Stephon Gilmore, Rasul Douglas, Brandon Scherf, and all that within a week span. That's not reality. However, the last 5 player acquisitions, Kendall Sheffield, Matthew Butler, Brett Gabbert, Ryan Cooper Jr., and Ben Stille just this Thursday morning. That's not exactly going to jack up a fan base.
No, it's not. It's not. I think it does kind of align with what the Dolphins have done all offseason, right? Like it's been about, they're not really going for the flash anymore. They're not going for the flashy players. They're trying to evolve the offense. And that might not excite some people, but I think the Dolphins view it as a necessary step, right? Like they've kind of been all flash, no substance for the past 3 years, and they're trying to turn the table on that. Now, are these bottom of the roster guys really going to do that for you? Yada, yada, yada. No, they're not, right? But like, I understand what they're trying to do from a big picture perspective, but I'm with you. Not exactly going to energize the fan base, not going to make a big difference in the win and loss column, these players specifically. And I think it's a difficult pill for fans to swallow because this team has like real holes. Like this is not like a super complete deep roster with, no problems. Like the quarterback position, you and me might be starting in week 1. I don't know. They got to bring in somebody.
Cornerback, sorry.
Yeah, corner. Like we might be starting out on the outside with Cater Kohu in week 1. They got to do something about that. They got all these young guys. They keep adding these bottom of the roster defensive tackles that like don't really inspire a ton of confidence in me. I don't know if you feel differently, but it's weird.
Yeah, and it's like, again, it's possible none of those guys will even be on the 53 come September. And so it's basically filling out the 90-man roster. And like I said, it's not the Dolphins are not going to go sign a big name after big name after big name, but they have some clear holes. And right now at defensive tackle, it's Sieler and a whole bunch of young guys and really hoping that your rookies produce. But let's backtrack a little bit here. And the last one, as I said, this was Thursday morning. The news: the Dolphins re-signed Ben Stille, who was released by the Arizona Cardinals last week and started his career as a UDFA with the Dolphins, spent some time with Arizona, spent some time with Tampa Bay. And the Cardinals waived him last week when they signed a rookie free agent. So, again, that sort of tells you he's a guy, we'll bring him in camp, or if he shines, he'll make the roster. If he doesn't, the big situations with the Dolphins still involve Jonnu Smith and still involve Jaylen Ramsey, which is the one out there. And I know there's some fans who maybe are thinking, what happened? It's June 5th. He hasn't been traded yet. And this is whereas I've written many times on the All Dolphins podcast, the problem is the $21 million he's got coming to him, which is a lot to take in. And I think a lot of teams are telling the Dolphins, you want any kind of return, any sort of return whatsoever for him, you pick up some of that tab. And the Dolphins obviously are resisting, which is why it may drag on.
Yeah, I think this is going to take a while, honestly, because the Dolphins are in a really tough spot where I know that, that bridge has been burned with Ramsey. There's no chance he plays on the Dolphins this year. And I totally understand that, but it is a really difficult pill to swallow to move a player of Ramsey's caliber, even in the twilight of his career. Maybe he's not quite the all-pro corner he was a few years ago, but he's still a good football player. And the Dolphins still need a starting outside corner. And so it's a really, really hard pill to swallow to trade this player for, I'm assuming what they're getting offered right now are 6th and 7th round picks. That would be my guess, because I'd like to think if it was like a 4 with incentives to move up, they would have pulled the trigger already, right? So like my guess is it's 5th, 6th, 7th round picks. If you're the Dolphins, I mean, it's really tough to want to trade Jaylen Ramsey for that. And you're certainly not going to get what you gave up to get him, a 3rd round pick and Hunter Long, when you traded for him from the Rams. You're not going to get that. No one's going to pay that price for Jaylen Ramsey as he's 2 years older. Like you said, you have to inherit that $21 million. No one's going to pay that price. So you're not going to get back what you gave away. And you're probably not going to get something in the middle, at least right now. And so, I thought the story that you did yesterday about the hypothetical trades that ESPN laid out, one of the interesting tidbits that I took away from that was one of the insiders said, hey, Ramsey might get cut. Like that is like a real thing that could happen. And I don't know that I agree necessarily, but like the longer that this drags out, are the Dolphins going to keep him on the roster and he's just not going to play? Like, no. And if no team steps up to the plate, it'll be interesting. I think the most likely outcome is the Rams, obviously, just because they have the connection to him. They're comfortable with him as a person in that locker room. So if a team is going to take on a decent chunk of that money, I think it's the Rams. But I wouldn't be surprised if this drags out for a pretty long time. I think it's going to take a while for a team to really suck it up.
Yeah, and if you look at the comments from Sean McVay, both around the draft and last week in the OTAs, and he's kind of like making it clear that we like the player and all that, but there are financial considerations to take, that have to be considered. Basically, kind of hint. Yeah, would love to make the trade, but here's an interesting one here that Dolphins have right now they've been doing OTAs in the offseason program, which to this point has been voluntary, which is why Ramsey not being there, no big deal. Jonnu Smith hasn't been there either. Again, only in Mike McDaniel has said he's been around. The only thing that we can go by other than what he's telling us is the 2 open OTAs, he wasn't there. Nor was Jaylen Ramsey. It would make no sense for Jaylen Ramsey to be there if their relationship is fractured. Nor was Zach Sieler, and we'll get to Sieler in a little bit. Nor was James Daniel, because he's recovering from a torn Achilles tendon he sustained last year. For all we know, he may have been inside doing some rehab work, but he wasn't out on the practice field. Next week is the mandatory mini camp, and it would surprise me 0, as in not at all, if the Dolphins told Jaylen Ramsey, you're good, it's mandatory, but don't worry about it. Because if logically there's a fine involved, but the teams can waive the fine if they so choose. I don't think there'd be much of a reason for Jaylen Ramsey to be there if there's 0 chance of a reconciliation and there has been no sign that that's even possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think they should just waive it, right? Like, I don't think you need to make this any more of a bad public problem, frankly, is what it's become, right? Like, it's just distracting from everything else that's going on with the team this year. And there's no reason to further aggravate Jaylen Ramsey, a player who is not afraid to speak his mind, and that's his prerogative. Players are allowed to do that. They have social media. Good for them. Makes our jobs a little bit easier sometimes, but like, there's no need to further aggravate him in the sense that you need to find him. Like, it's clear that this is a clean break on both sides. It's just how long are the Dolphins going to hold out for something better than what I'm assuming they're getting now, which is probably, late day 3 picks.
Correct. And that's the point we also need to make, that after next Thursday, which is the last day of the veteran mini camp, or sorry, the mandatory mini camp, veterans are done until training camp in mid-July. So it's like there are no veterans around. So it's not like there's like a major rush to do anything during that period of time. So if nothing gets done by the end of the mini camp, very possible the Dolphins are going to sit back, because ideally what the Dolphins want to create is more of a demand for Ramsey. And how does that happen? Is if a contender loses a cornerback to an unfortunate injury, as happened with the Steelers and their backup tight end, their new backup tight end, Donald Parham Jr., who tore an Achilles in practice, which preceded the second report that the Steelers are no longer interested in Jonnu Smith. Oh, the Steelers are interested in Jonnu Smith. Here's the thing, though. Before we go too heavy on that hypothetical, Donald Parham had been released. They signed him to a very low money deal. Are we expecting the Steelers, who gave Pat Freiermuth, their starter, a 4-year extension last year with $48 million new money, to be willing to pay good money to get Jonnu Smith as well as a second tight end? Little dubious about that. I've said all along, I think ultimately he winds up staying with the Dolphins, where maybe they up their offer a little bit. Drew Rosenhaus, Jonnu's agent, drops the demand a little bit, and they meet at some point. What's your prediction? Where's Jonnu Smith playing in 2025?
I think he stays in Miami too. I think that's where the most momentum is, right? Like the Steelers are a team that you can connect to Jonnu through Arthur Smith. Like you mentioned, they lost Donald Parham. So like that makes some sense that they'd at least call the Dolphins and, say, hey, what's the price for this guy? But I think ultimately, Jonnu wants to be in Miami. His agent has said as such. Mike McDaniel, when he spoke to you guys on Tuesday, said, hey, I'm envisioning Jonnu being here, basically. Like that's the version of this team that I see this year. I think there's enough positive momentum. And I do think Jonnu probably doesn't want top 10 tight end money. I think that would be where I would draw the line as the organization. I'm not going to pay Jonnu Smith as a top 10 tight end in the NFL. If he wants something close but not quite top 10, I'd be willing to meet him there. And I think that there's enough room, right? Because if you look at Jonnu's contract now, he's grossly underpaid. I don't blame him at all for asking for a new contract. This is a player who earned that last year. As much as I can sit here and say, hey, his targets are really replaceable and he's not the ideal tight end for this offense, blah, 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 blah. He's earned a hefty raise. Like he deserves a lot more money than the Dolphins are currently paying him. And I think that there's enough room that the Dolphins can come up to where, hey, he's happy. He feels like he's valued for what he did last year. But also in the sense that the Dolphins are not going to break the bank on him. And I probably wouldn't either. I would not want to push him into I think Evan Ingram is 10th in tight end AAV at $11.5 million. I don't want to pay Jonnu Smith that much money this year. I certainly don't want to extend him for that much money either. But if it's something in the 8 to 10 range, I think that's fair compensation for him. That's a huge raise for him in 1 year. And it doesn't push the Dolphins too far into paying a 30-year-old tight end a little bit too much money. So I think there's enough room for the two sides to get it done. Because, what are the Steelers going to give the Dolphins for Jonnu Smith? A 5th-round pick?
I think the Dolphins absolutely should balk at that. I can't remember, and shame on me for doing wide receivers get traded all the time. I can't remember the last time a high end, or let's say upper half of the league tight end was traded to do a comparison, in terms of the compensation. But 5th seems really, really low to me. And point that needs to be made in the court of public opinion here, we've heard from Drew Rosenhaus through his appearance on WSVN, South Florida local station, where he does a regular spot, where he's saying, Jonnu really wants to stay in Miami, and he had the best receiving season ever. No, he called it the best season ever for a Dolphin tight end. Well, let's clarify. It's the best receiving season ever for a Dolphin tight end. I'd have to go back and look at the film for every single tight end in terms of overall performance, because Jonnu does not contribute a ton in terms of the blocking. But for receiving, in terms of volume, that's what it was. Going just by memory, and this is way before your time. I don't even know if you were born, but I can remember Keith Jackson in the early 1990s, to me, being a lot more significant part of the offense than Jonnu was last year. Keith Jackson was a tight end who played for Dante's look, this is where I deal with young people.
I'm sorry. I was born in 99.
See, there you go. So you weren't even born.
No, I was not even born.
This is how old I am. I actually saw Keith Jackson playing college at Oklahoma because he was a big rival of the University of Miami, which is a team that I covered as well. And he was part of a court case. This is a little history nugget here for those. He was part of a court case in September 1992 where 4 players, and I suck because I can't remember the other 3, but sued the NFL for the right to become free agents, which is what set up unrestricted free agency as we know it. The judge said, damn straight, you 4 players are right now free agents. And the Dolphins won the bidding services for Keith Jackson. And I believe the date of the trial or the decision was September 29th, 1992. Yes, the Rain Man's going at it right now. And then 5 days later, Keith Jackson was in the lineup in the game at Buffalo, which was the powerhouse in the AFC East, like they are now. And then Keith Jackson had 4 catches for 64 yards and 1 touchdown. I've written about it several times. That's why I remember.
That's pretty good. That's some good recall right there.
My whole point being talk about like a detour here was that I don't know if I go as far as to say that Jonnu Smith had the best receiving tight end ever for Dolphin. No, the best season overall ever for Dolphin tight end. Statistically, had the best receiving season ever. And that's going to come from Drew. That's what he's going to say. That's his job. The Dolphins, who would have counterpoints of A, benefited from the space provided by Hill and Waddle and even HN. And B, he didn't contribute a ton to but that's not going to come out because the Dolphins are not going to do anything publicly about it. All they're going to say, if we ask Mike McDaniel, what's he going to say? Love Jonnu, good team player, want him on the team. Where actually he's not, he could go the Paul Maurice route, the little hockey tweet, which is hilarious, because he was asked about a player, I think it might have been Paul Reinhardt last year or whatever, and his contributions to the team. And Maurice stopped himself and goes, wait, his contract's up, right? Oh, he's got a lot of work to do on his game. I mean, he's really struggling in a lot of areas. And then somebody points out, no, he just signed a contract. Oh, no, well, he's brilliant. He's a fabulous player. I mean, obviously he gets it. There's a game to be played. All that to be said, I don't think the Dolphins absolutely should pull the trigger for a 5th-round pick. Having said all that, this is where I fight back. And no, I'm not pro team. I'm not pro player and all that. But there's some Dolphin fans who are like, the Dolphins have to do whatever it takes to get Jonnu Smith happy and keep him on the team. Again, it doesn't work like that because the Dolphins did that last year with Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle, Jaylen Ramsey, Tua. They gave them those guys what they wanted. How'd that work out?
Not great.
Okay.
I mean, the thing with Jonnu too is that, like, I don't know if you agree with this, but in my mind, I don't really think Jonnu was in this team's plans past this season. I don't think that he was going to be a player that was ever going to get an extension, unless he like suddenly became a really good blocker and also did the receiving things that he did last year. Like, I think that's the only universe in which Jonnu Smith was viewed as a long-term option. I mean, the Dolphins, they signed him to a really modest contract. He outperformed it. He deserves a raise for sure, but I don't really think the Dolphins signed him with the intent that he was going to be a long-term tight end for this team. I think ultimately they are kind of piecing that room together with multiple stopgap options until they can find that, unicorn tight end, which is incredibly rare. I think the Dolphins strategy is viable. It's not easy to find George Kittle. There's only one. And then you've got a couple of guys who are like close, but they're not George Kittle. And so I think the Dolphin strategy is fine, but like ideally, I don't know that Jonnu Smith was ever going to be a player that this team valued past the 2025 season. And so I think this was always going to be an impasse if Jonnu Smith played well last year. And so I'd like to think that the Dolphins were like somewhat prepared for this. I don't know. That might be wishful thinking on my part, but I think ultimately they can come together here. There's enough want on both sides. There's enough of a bridge in the money terms that I think you can make Jonnu happy and not commit to him long term, which I don't think was ever your plan in the first place. So I don't know. I think fans kind of see the numbers and they want Jonnu. They feel like this team isn't as good as it was last year, and they don't want to lose another really good player, and that's understandable from a very surface level conversation, but long term, I don't think Jonnu was ever going to be on the Miami Dolphins in 2026. So it's a year out. It's out a year early rather than a year late in this scenario.
Yeah, and I said this before, and I'm going to repeat it for those who might have missed it. My thought as a solution to this impasse is to give him the kind of contract the Dolphins gave to Raheem Mostert in March of 2024, which included, it's a new contract, included the signing bonus as a reward for your good work the previous season, but it included no guarantee. There was some guarantee that first year, no guaranteed money the second year. And then you revisit it if you decide that Smith has earned a third season with the Dolphins in 2026, you can adjust it. If not, you move on the way the Dolphins moved on from Raheem Mostert. Zach Sieler is another guy who has outperformed his contract bad and more so. And I don't know about you, but for me in the pecking order, it would be like Jonnu, chill out a little bit. We need to address Zach Sieler because what's his number? 7 million. And he is like a high-end defensive tackle, double-digit sacks the past 2 seasons, team MVP. And Zach also is represented by Drew Rosenhaus, who no doubt is very hip to the fact that the defensive line with the Dolphins right now is Zach Sieler, a whole bunch of young guys, and a whole bunch of unproven guys. So Dolphins right now, I would say, need Zach Sieler a hell of a lot more than they need Jonnu Smith.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the reasons I'm apprehensive about extending Jonnu Smith is age, right? He's an older player. I don't know how well he's going to age. Zach Sieler is in that same bucket, but I don't have the same concerns. I think Sieler is a player now that you've seen 5 seasons of above average to elite play, right? Like this dude is good. He's very good. Somehow still one of the most underrated players in the league, even though
is he though?
I think so. I don't think he gets the national rec that he deserves. I think he's one of the 10 best defensive tackles in the sport. And I rarely see him put up in that stratosphere. There are a lot of names at the national media. As someone who formerly was a member of the national media, there are a lot of names that get cycled through before people get to Zach Sieler. I still think he's a little bit underrated. And I think he's underrated by his own team, which is the more relevant conversation because they're not paying him enough money relative to his performance. And so I agree with you. I think he skips to the head of the line. I think you get this done from an optics standpoint, what we talked about at the top of the show. I think it shows the locker room that, hey, you're going to reward the players that have been in the building, that have multiple years of success in Miami, who are team leaders. Do it the right way. Zach Sieler, an undrafted free agent who signed a contract in the middle of the season, right? Or was he a 7th-round pick? He might have been a 7th-round pick out of Ferris State.
He also was claimed off waiver from the Ravens.
Right. So you claimed off waiver. But my point being, right, is a guy who built himself up, did it the right way, completely just worked his butt off and turned himself into a really, really good football player. That's the type of player that you reward. And the defensive tackle market has exploded in recent years. There are players who are half of Zach Sieler making double of what Zach Sieler is making. So he's due for a really good raise. I think this one probably is like an extension. Like I think it's like a new contract, basically. I don't know that it's like an adjustment of his current deal. I think it's a long-term extension with a lot of money that's front-loaded in the bonus category. I think he gets a huge bonus and just gets that money up front. The Dolphins can then prorate it through void years if it becomes a problem later. So that would be my prediction for that deal. And I agree with you. I think that needs to come before they do anything with Jonnu Smith, or honestly, I mean, obviously if somebody calls you with a really good Jaylen Ramsey trade, you take it, of course, but I would even put the phone down on that and I would go to work on getting that Sieler contract done. I think that's got to be priority number 1 right now.
No, I agree. And it's interesting you mentioned void years because apparently those are in the crosshairs of Roger Goodell, who does not like the void years because it basically gets teams to spend more money beyond the cap just to be able to get under the cap and give the player what he wants. And it's basically the void years, for those not aware, is let's say you sign a player to a 5-year contract. Well, the contract has salary for 2 years, but the signing bonus is spread out over 5 years to lower the cap number every year. And then you've got 3 years that are called void years where the player's not on your team, but you're still paying that prorated portion of the signing bonus.
Yeah, you can kick those down the road currently indefinitely. You almost never have to actually pay that money. We're going to see what happens in 2029 with the Eagles. They have stretched all of their contracts to 2029 through void years. So we'll see if they change it before. I don't think they can because the next CBA is 2031, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they may reopen before. I think 2030. It may reopen before that, but that's something to keep an eye on down the road. Unlike Jaylen Ramsey, I would suspect Zach Sieler to be there at the veteran minicamp. Why do I keep calling it veteran minicamp? You know why? Because that used to be a thing that, teams are allowed to have a veteran minicamp. I think if they're only their first-year coaches before the draft, and then there was the veteran minicamp and the mandatory minicamp, which is different, which is what the Dolphins have next week. Chances are I would suspect Zach Sieler to be there, probably not doing anything because the last thing he wants is to get himself injured while he's looking for a new contract. Jonnu Smith will be interesting. And again, it's not unprecedented for players to not attend, get fined, and then they sign a new contract, and either they make up the money or those fines are waived. So, but I would probably be more on the 50-50 that he'll be there. What else do we need to discuss here on this wonderful Thursday? Dolphins had one more OTA today that was going to wrap up their OTAs. Reminder that teams are allowed up to 10 OTAs, organized team activities. The Dolphins have used 6 every year under Mike McDaniel. No, I don't think it's a big deal, and it's not why they run out of gas at the end of the season or what. And then there's a mandatory minicamp next week, which runs from Tuesday through Thursday. There's also then the rookie orientation program. The details are nebulous. Teams are allowed to keep their rookies in for a little bit longer, again, to acclimate them to life in the NFL. Veterans are done until training camp in July. I don't know. With Jaylen Ramsey, with Jonnu Smith, something could happen immediately, could take a while. Same with Zach Sieler. To me, I think the next item on the agenda, I didn't have signing Ben Stilley on my bingo card as the next item on the agenda. Ideally, the next item of business is Zach Sieler signs a contract extension.
Yeah, I think that, and that's probably like the easiest one to do. At least I would like to think, right? Because the Jonnu one, I think you're going to have a pretty, I'm going to go with, verbose debate on Jonnu Smith's value. Like that's a player where I think like he's going to push for a lot more money than you're probably willing to give. And then you got to meet somewhere in the middle. To me, Sieler, I think should be pretty easy. You just pay him what he's worth and you call it a day. It's an extension. It's not going to kill you on the cap this year, probably. Obviously, it's something you'll have to worry about in future years, but I think he's well worth it, right? Like he's in your plans past 2025, unlike Jonnu Smith. And the Ramsey one, I really think that's going to drag out. Like that would not shock me if it drags out like through a good portion of training camp. Like I don't really know what urgency is going to be generated for teams like the Rams, maybe the Panthers, right, have sort of been like pegged as a team that could be interested in Ramsey. Like what urgency do those teams have to bend to the Dolphins' wishes right now? None, zero. And I think that's only going to come, like you mentioned earlier, from training camp. So I would guess like Sieler, Smith, Ramsey in order if I had to.
Okay. And this is where I will bring this up as a point of reference because the past always a very good predictor of the future. Last year, the Dolphins signed Jaylen Waddle in the spring. I want to say it was right around minicamp or before minicamp. They signed Tua, who was a different scenario. Tua was heading into the 5th-year option. They signed him on July 28th. And then they signed Tyreek and Jaylen Ramsey, who both were under team control for a couple of years, as Zach Sieler is. They signed those two in early September, like right before the start of the regular season. So not saying that's going to be the same timeline, just using it as a point of reference. So on that note, that's going to wrap it up for this Thursday. Please like, subscribe, share as always. Programming note, got the Dolphins Collective with TD Fins Talk, Doug Lee, Durong, Omar Kelly, and myself. Thursday, 7:30 p.m. live on YouTube. Tomorrow on the All Dolphins podcast, I am scheduled to be joined live from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada by South Florida Sun Sentinel columnist Dave Hyde, where we won't be talking Panthers. Don't worry. We may throw in a couple of words here and there. Great game last night if you watched it. Panthers lost 4-3 in overtime. And by the way, full disclosure, my sports bucket list that I've yet to experience, Stanley Cup final, Game 7 overtime, where next goal wins the cup. I've always thought that could be the coolest thing ever. hoping it's going to happen. Last night we got one in game 1. So that would be very cool. So that's the programming note. Thank you very much for Dante Colonelli, deputy editor of Miami Dolphins on SI. Read us. Find content on that fabulous site, MiamiDolphinsOnSI.com. Oh, you'll find my stuff there as well. So that's going to do it for now. Again, please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your Thursday.